Well, welcome everybody to episode 1 of the Thriving on Mission podcast. Or is it a show? I'm not really sure what we're going to call it at this point other than Thriving on Mission. I'm your host, Matt Rogie, and we're just going to start off this episode talking a little bit about why Thriving on Mission. Why did I decide to put in some time and effort into this podcast? So with me here also is producer Quinn.
Hey.
And just big shout out and thanks for him. And he's actually part of this story too for why Thriving on Mission. And so let's just get into it. So a big reason that I chose this name, Thriving on Mission, was to talk about the difference of what it means to thrive versus survive. And as people will be able to start to learn my story a little bit, you know, the fact that I'm a combat veteran, served for 22 years, ended up getting diagnosed with PTSD, and I sort of fell into this place of just surviving each day. And that would look differently depending upon the day. And what I found was obviously that can take you to some really deep, dark, unhealthy places. And through a lot of people in my lives, I've had some incredible friends, coaches, mentors, people that discipled me, counselors, medical professionals who have helped me sort of try and tweak and figure out, you know, how I can thrive versus survive. And we'll talk more extensively throughout these episodes of what that actually looks like for me and maybe some stories for some others, but how to thrive. And when I say thriving on mission, you know, and that term mission can mean so many things to so many people. And I don't necessarily mean, and it could be your life's mission, whatever that is. Maybe it's a professional mission. Maybe it's just what you're going to be going through today or what you're going to be waking up and doing for the next 30 minutes. You know, but this idea that how can we better ourselves? You know, again, thankfully, I've been taught a lot of things, and I've been able to absorb a few of those things. Unfortunately, not as much as I would have liked. And I've been shown a lot of grace. And as we'll see as we go on today's episode, that I'm able to use that to help others. And that's really what I want to do through this podcast, through this show. You know, I'm doing this to help others. You know, selfishly, I'm also doing it for myself. And I don't mean that narcissistic or, you know, with a big ego, but I mean, it's therapy for me as well to sit here and to talk, knowing that, you know, other veterans, other listeners, people who have gone through similar things, or maybe they know somebody who's going through similar things, or they just want more of an insight into somebody's mind or somebody's thoughts who are struggling with these things, of what that looks like. But it's therapy for me just to sit here and just to talk through these things. And again, that's just, you know, so when I say I'm doing it for myself, that's what I mean, but, you know, but also for others. As some of the listeners already know, and as you know, Quinn, I was here, I think it was about 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And I was on the Neglected show with our friend, Nick Schultz. And he brought me on to interview me. And really the purpose was sort of this idea. He knows my story, and somebody who grew up as a combat veteran in the military for 22 years, again, diagnosed with PTSD. And how do I deal with that now? Where have I gone? Where have I been? And where am I at now? And it was through that podcast where I met you. And that was awesome. And I also got a chance to hear your story as well. And which again is just another incredible story of I think in a lot of ways thriving on mission, or learning how to thrive, just based upon your story and the things that you've overcome. But, you know, but it was through that podcast, which again, I went into that with a lot of nervousness, you know, for multiple reasons. And it also coincided with the release or with a time to where a lot of my friends were going to be around for my military service. And I was really unsure of the reception it was going to have. But, you know, it went completely opposite of the way that I was fearing.
Yeah.
You know, I received such positive reception of just telling my story, of really what I'm doing now, and talking about the ways that I've struggled and the ways that I've overcome obstacles, and just, again, nothing more than sharing our story, which, I believe is one of the greatest things that we have to give, is sharing our story with others. And so it was through that, this response from people that I had. I mean, I've had soldiers come up to me since then who have listened to my podcast, guys that are there at Hunter Army Airfield and who are in combat and have just said, "Hey, Matt, can we get together and have coffee? I was listening to your podcast and I'd like to just sit and just talk." And, and I'm like, "Sure." And I'd sit down with them. And I really said very little during the one time I'm really thinking about, but, for him, it was just an opportunity for him to, I'll say word vomit and just sort of just talk about his experiences a little bit, talk about some of the things that he has recently gone through and some of those struggles. And knowing that, I guess from hearing my story, is he just felt it was a safe place. He felt, there wasn't going to be any judgment or, something along those lines. But, at the end of that, we probably talked for about an hour and he's like, "Man, that was awesome and great." And, I probably, I don't think I said anything too insightful or, but it was just, but he felt better and he felt more encouraged and, ready to thrive versus survive. And so I thought that was, and that happened a few times. I ran into some people, again, the timing of the podcast release, our unit, the 160th Special Ops, we had our big anniversary for the unit here in Savannah, the 3rd Battalion, 160th. And so there was a big formal, which is, this basically a black tie event that was over at the Weston Convention Center. And so I ran into people that I hadn't seen for 10, 15 years. Yeah. And guys are just like, "Hey, Matt, thanks for sharing what you said. I really appreciate it." Yeah. And it was things that just needed to be said, or, things that they wanted to say so they could resonate with. And I think, but I've got one story I want to share just really quick. Again, why am I doing it? And this one actually was a story that was sent to my wife, and again, we don't always think about, that, from one person, it's a ripple effect. And so when somebody's going through something good or bad, it's going to ripple out and affect all these different relationships. And so my wife received this Facebook message about a week after that interview aired. And she said, "Hey, Stacy, it's been a while since we've chatted, but I wanted to connect with you. I had the honor of listening to Matt's podcast yesterday, and I was so encouraged by it. I remember a lot of that journey, but it was always distance because I only got to talk to you every so often. So I'm remarried now to a combat veteran. He has PTSD and also a traumatic brain injury. He's learned how to manage it because he was single and never had to account for anyone. And now that he's married, I bump up against that all the time. He's having to seek a lot of help and do a lot of work. And after listening to Matt, I thought I'd reach out to you just to see if you had any wisdom to share. And honestly, I wish I lived in Savannah so that my husband could chat with Matt. I think it would be helpful. What do I do with that? Yeah. What does anybody do with that other than, and again, I'm just thankful that I can share my story. Yeah. For sure. Because I hope for this lady who's obviously loves somebody very much and sees them struggling, sees them, going through these terrible things, and they love them and they want to help them, and so I just pray that, it was able to provide some hope to them. Interestingly enough, on a good note, is she received a follow-up. And I think this was about a week or two ago. I'm not 100% sure, but it was definitely after, there's some time had lapsed since the first message. And she wrote my wife and said, I've got to say, my husband listened to his podcast and he has a lot of questions about his story. He had his first appointment at the VA shortly after you, and I chatted. It completely shook him based upon the things that they told him. But he does have severe PTSD, and it's brought on by a lot of triggers and constant looping of his thoughts. And again, just to hear that, steps are being made going forward. And again, why am I doing this? Not that I have answers, that I have, maybe I have some. Yeah. But again, it's that hope that, maybe there was some inkling in my story that allowed him to say, or somebody else to say, you know what, I do need help, and to make that step, whether that's make a phone call to a friend, a pastor, a counselor, go seek medical help, whatever that might be, because it's not easy for any of us who've been in these situations.
Yeah, whenever I had a feeling that you would have that reception, shortly afterwards, I was talking to a buddy of mine. I told you that he's in the UK, I think, right now.
That's right.
In training to do the same thing you were doing with the son of someone that you served with, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And so, you hear people sometimes talk about how many degrees of separation, you are from knowing pretty much everybody on the planet. And it's just one of those things that clicked for me that was like, oh, this is going to be one of those things where like everything just kind of comes together. And I mean, your story is unique, and you can relate to guys like this guy that is a situation, an experience that, very few people in comparison to the rest of at least the nation, have. It's one that I'll never be able to relate to, like someone like you can. And so it's valuable, man, and so that's why, we're doing this to begin with.
Yeah. So, yeah, I forgot about, I'm glad you brought that back up. And again, just as far as, your friend who his friend is, and the relationship as a son to one of our fallen, and again, just thankful that, I've got this opportunity and to be here for that. So, so that's really, again, why I'm doing it.
Just curious, what do you talked about thriving and surviving? What do those two words mean to you?
Thriving to me means getting up in the morning and with a smile, really, and being able to look at the day and not wish it would be over, and and not permanently, but I mean, just like, I just want to go back to bed. I just, and being able to look at something and know that I have a purpose.
Yeah.
And, whatever that purpose might be for the day or for the week or the month, or maybe there's some project I'm working on, but, the issue is, with post-traumatic stress and other mental health stuff, I mean, it's in the mind. I mean, and there is some chemical changes that are occurring, but, we have a lot of power to counteract that, and some of it's from medication, some of it's from counseling, some incredible tools that are out there. And then some of it, obviously we have to make a conscious choice though to do that. So I think thriving for me, again, is that idea of waking up, this morning for me, and it was putting my feet on the floor and going, hey, today I'm going to record episode 1.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Versus, I could say, episode 1, why am I doing this? Nobody, and just, and take myself into a really dark place and then not leave the house.
Yeah.
So it definitely looks, and that'll look different for everybody, I think.
For sure.
And with that too, with this whole Thriving on Mission and this podcast and the idea of where, I think, from talking with you and some others of where we want the show to go, there's always going to be this underlying little bit of trepidation that I have as far as doing this. And I was trying to figure out where, if I could sum that up in just a couple words, what's my biggest fear? And really it comes down to, I don't want to dishonor certain groups of people.
Yeah.
And, that's probably my overriding motive to do well with this. And, because there are certain groups of people that, because of my service in the military, because of being in combat, that they are forever ingrained now as part of my life. Yeah. And it affects my thought process. It affects my actions every day. And, people who have been in my situation can probably immediately start naming what some of those groups are. But, for the other listeners, it's the memories of those that have, the fallen, the ones that have given the ultimate sacrifice. And, when I think of guys that I served with who are now gone, Corey, Shirk, Steve Reich, the other 5 from the aircraft that was shot down in 2005. I think about, Monty. I think about others that died, Mike. And I'm just like, because of what they did and their story, I want to make sure that I pay ultimate respect to theirs, as far as telling mine. And, because as far as I'm concerned, what I've done is nothing compared to what they did.
Yeah.
And so there's that. And with that also becomes the Gold Star families. And again, for people who aren't familiar with that term, the Gold Star families are the survivors of the guys that have fallen, the ones that have been killed. And, they bear the biggest weight of that, I think. Yeah. And, and again, because of that, and they've got this enormous shoes now that they're asked to fill. And it looks different for every family. But again, there's a huge amount of respect that I and, other combat veterans have for these Gold Star families because of what, again, they have to live with on a daily basis, not having a son, a brother, a sister, a husband, a father, a mother, things like that. And, and again, that would always be the last thing I would ever want to do. There's one, a Gold Star widow, and she's just absolutely the strongest individual, and I'll share that I'll save that for another episode. I've got an incredible story about that one. Right after her husband was killed. So this is like, I guess, a teaser for a future episode. But right after her husband was killed, she sent over a letter to those that were still over there. And I've still got it. And just incredible, and just speaks volumes. Yeah. But again, and then lastly, I never want to dishonor my brothers in arms, brothers and sisters in arms, because again, those are the ones that I fought side by side. I mean, I've got my friend Tim here with us today, just as moral support. And, guys that, since 9/11, we were doing it all the time, flying combat missions. And again, that's just that, I'll use that cliche band of brothers. People are familiar with that HBO miniseries, but there is something that happens with that. And so I just want to make sure that, we don't dishonor those guys and gals that are out there. All right. So, and you asked this question, what's the difference between thriving and surviving right now? And I talked a little bit about that, but, I wonder if people are on the edge of their seat thinking, all right, is Matt going to give me a checklist? Is he going to give me a PowerPoint presentation? I laugh about that because in our old job, not only were we very good pilots, but we also became experts at PowerPoint. And checklists were, we had to have a checklist for everything. Yeah. And so, it was very type A, type of stuff. But, no, I'm not. But I can tell you that I think, going into this year, as far as thriving right now, it's been purpose. Yeah. I was, sitting this morning with Tim having a cup of coffee, and we were talking about purpose and how important that was. And granted, that's just a mindset. But again, we can unpack that so much more, but especially as a combat veteran who, where you think about guys and gals of what they were doing on a daily basis. And now they're back here. And some people are able to make that transition a lot easier than others. And there's a host of reasons why. And obviously some aren't. But purpose, for me is important, and for me right now, purpose is coming here and sharing my story a little bit. Yeah. Talking a little bit about the things that I'm struggling with and moving forward because literally, and I said this earlier, sometimes it could just be, I'm just going to get out of bed and put my feet on the floor. Yeah. That's a win. Yeah. And sometimes it's going to be, maybe it's a little bit more. Maybe it's, I'm going to go exercise, or I'm going to spend some quiet time, or I'm going to go hang out and have a cup of coffee with somebody today, say hey to somebody that I have never said hey to before at work, whatever it might be, but there's a purpose that we all have. Yeah. Obviously, as from what we believe as followers of Christ, there's a very overarching purpose to that, and not everybody has that same belief though. But when we drill down to it, everybody wants that purpose and that meaning. And, for me, that's what I'm starting to figure out, and thriving, is having that purpose. Is it going to fix everything? No. I think even all the things that are out there. I don't think that there's one magic bullet or one magic pill that's going to take care of everything, but it's pulling things from multiple areas and, using them to try and make things better for you, and again, I mean, I've done counseling, I've done, different types of therapy, cognitive therapy, EMDR therapy. I could talk extensively about SUDS levels, and for those that have gone through that treatment, I hope I say that with a chuckle, but they'll understand what I mean by that. But it's trying to pick different things there, put it all together.
Yeah, I completely get it. Going through all the different addiction therapy that I have, it's I've taken just a little chunk of all of it and kind of made my own thing that works. So it's something different works for everybody, you know?
Exactly. Because there's times to where, I mean, for me personally, to where I might wake up and if I've had, a bad, a dream or a nightmare, and sometimes not even a nightmare. Sometimes it's just been dreams about guys that I used to serve with, guys that are dead now. And these really dreams that are sort of based somewhat in reality, but also in this dream state of like, I see them but I know I shouldn't, because I know that they're dead, and this whole wave of emotions. And then I wake up and I'm like, oh gosh, what do I do that? And I don't consciously think about, all right, well, I need to do this therapy that somebody told me, or, and maybe that's the way it started out, but now it's just, I've been able to sort of pluck different things here and there. And medication is part of it right now. And, as we go forward and talking about that, I know there's a stigma, huge stigma with mental health, seeking help for mental health, and also medication for that. But there's definitely a time and a place for it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one thing that, I definitely understand. It's, I take the road of no medication, not because it works or doesn't work for me. It's,
right.
Just my own personal beliefs with it, but I understand where, and there are days where I would prefer to be on it,
right.
Really, like there are days that, I hit that wall and I know that I'm not going to climb over it today.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I get it, man.
Exactly. And so really what I'm looking forward to is over these next, as we continue forward with these podcasts, is just, talking through some of this stuff. And, that might be more with you, Quinn, or that will be more with you, but also, I've got some people I want to bring on, either, bring them in live, or, maybe we're going to do some phone calls with some people, but I've got some incredible people in my life that I've met over the past year that have inspired me, have also shown me purpose, but people who are out there, not necessarily veterans, but they've started these organizations that help veterans.
Yeah.
There's one organization that I did a couple events with last year that we'll talk about in a future episode, but and the founder is just an incredible lady. And then got some other vets, got some local organizations too that we want to talk about and go forward. But and that's going to be intertwined with, I'm sure we're going to talk about combat stories, and that's not to show bravado. That's not to say, hey, look at me and look at what I did, but because it's so intricately woven into our story. And you think about it, I mean, gosh, 9/11 was how many years now? 18 years ago, I think. 2010, it's been over 18 years now. And I mean, there are stories from back at the beginning of the war that need to be told. And not necessarily it's my story or anything. I mean, there are so many heroes that have gone forward already, and those stories are just still sitting out there.
Yeah.
With that, and it's important for people to know that, because I remember when this was back in 1990, I was going through flight school, and there was a book that I read, and it was called Chicken Hawk. And anybody who's gone through Army Aviation Flight School knows without a doubt what that book is, Chicken Hawk, because it's about a guy who goes through flight school during the Vietnam War. And then it talks about his experience going over to Vietnam as his pilot. But it wasn't required reading, but pretty much everybody had it, you know, but it was this incredible story. And in 1990, I mean, his experiences were probably 23 years beforehand, which wasn't, you know, now we're only 18 years from back at the beginning of, you know, 9/11.
Yeah.
And so really there's not that much of a difference. And I think, again, for these young people that are coming into the military, if there's anything my story or other stories can help, you know, just to help give them a frame of reference to help them thrive a little bit more in whatever they're going into, you know, I think it'll be worth it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, that wraps up, you know, for what I wanted to talk about today in episode 1. And, you know, again, Quinn, just big thanks to you.
Yeah.
For doing this. I do want to talk more about your story. Again, I think that's going to be intertwined as we go forward. But, you know, it's because of what you said to me after that interview 2 months ago that I'm sitting here right now. And, you know, which I think goes to show everybody that, you know, we all play a part and have some incredible ways to help tell stories. So if you want to, you can go ahead and check us out. I've got a website, thrivingonmission.com, and that's going to have these shows we posted up there as well on YouTube. But I'm also going to have an opportunity for listeners if there's a certain thing that they want to, a question they want to ask, or just something they'd like to hear me talk about, or maybe a guest they'd like to have on, or maybe they're the guest. You know, there'll be a place that they can go ahead and message me on the website. And I mean, I'd love to do that versus, you know, me just thinking about what people want to talk about. But I'm sure some people would like to have some things to say.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that's it. That wraps up episode 1, and we'll see you next week.
Cool. See y'all.